And so what are the factors right now that are contributing to this emergent food insecurity, quote, problem? Why are these people who were being fed not being fed now?
Let's talk about energy. Energy is another kill shot, right?
Yeah,
and you see this highly ill-advised war in Ukraine. I was in Lithuania last year warning about this over and over and over. I was down in Morocco with my friend, war correspondent Chuck Holton, and we called up Frontex, which is like the European Border Patrol, you might say. Their headquarters in Warsaw. And they said, Belarus, Lukashenko, the dictator there, is pushing migrants into Lithuania. And I had been with the Lithuanian army in Afghanistan. I called them up. I said, what's going on? And they said, hey, come on up. So I flew from Morocco to Vilnius, Lithuania, and I had full access to their elected officials, intelligence, the camps for the migrants and army, the whole thing. So for almost a month, right? So I was very well aware that Russia is up to something, and I was publishing that, right? And so we've gone into this war in Ukraine, right? And Russia is just, of course, obviously, Nord Stream is cut, right? Will it be turned back on? And now, as you probably are aware, we just had an explosion.
I wouldn't turn it on if I was Putin.
I wouldn't either. And, even Trump warned them about this years ago, love him or hate him. He was very clear about it. And we just had an explosion roughly a month ago at a Texas port, an LNG facility, which is critical, right? We were supplying liquid natural gas to Europe. This would have helped. You need this for the Haber-Bosch process to create many of the fertilizers, right? That natural gas is very important. Then we had an explosion and a pipeline explosion roughly 2 weeks ago in Texas. And then we just had another natural gas problem at a plant in Oklahoma. We've had 3. Oklahoma, 2 in Texas, right? Meanwhile, they're being shut off from Russia. And we've got a potential war brewing here, for instance, between Iran and Israel. Imagine where that could go on energy supplies. We're looking at...
Okay, so let's look at that for a minute. So I'm going to lay down a proposition here for all of you who are listening. If you are a friend to the poor and the oppressed and the hungry, the number one thing you want to do is drive energy prices as low as they possibly can be on every front that you possibly can manage. And that bloody well includes coal and petroleum and natural gas. And then we could add nuclear to that. And if you want to throw renewables in for the tiny percentage that they account for, you could do that too. But because energy is equivalent to work, and because work is equivalent to food and shelter, if you make energy expensive, what you do is you starve the poor. And you don't have to starve them very much before they become desperate and things fall apart. And then we fall into these positive feedback loops that Michael has been describing. And so when you hear these bloody globalist utopians talk about the necessity for higher energy costs, you remember that comes directly at the cost of the world's poor. Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, 2 weeks ago had the unmitigated and I would say quasi-demonic gall to announce publicly that $8 a gallon gasoline in Canada was actually probably a good thing because Canadians should be reminded nonstop just how severe the climate crisis is every time they fill up their cars. And that's perfectly bloody fine unless you're living on the edge of your economic capability. And the fact that you can't afford to fill up your car anymore puts you into unemployment and food deprivation in relationship to your children. And that's in the rich West. And now in Europe, we're so goddamn stupid on our energy policy because of these idiot environmental schemes that we've made ourselves pathologically reliant on the Russians. And we're going to bloody well see what that costs us. And I know the Germans are burning coal again because their switch, massively expensive and counterproductive switch to so-called renewals has been another catastrophe. And so now God only knows how expensive energy is going to become. And that's directly related to the provision of the famines that Michael is talking about. So get ready for this, folks, because it's coming down the pipes.
Jordan, Germans are collecting wood right now, as much as they can get. They realize this can be a very cold winter, right?
Yeah, this is going to be well, that's what I thought. The globalist utopian mantra, let the poor freeze in the dark. That's how you save the planet.
It's coming.
No kidding, man.
If anything can destroy the European Union, that'll be it. If Germany collapses, it's over, right? And, many of us have been looking at Greece and Italy and Portugal and Spain for years, wondering which one would go first. I thought it would probably be Greece, but we saw Italy looks like they might be the first to fall off the tree, right? And probably the other three, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Greece or Italy already, Greece probably will be soon to follow. These are the weak canaries in this coal mine.
I mean, it'll fall out of the European Union.
Oh, yeah. And now, look, Putin has just cut the gas for the annual maintenance. And of course, we've got Zelensky over there saying that, Canada should not send back the turbine to Germany. And he's inserting himself basically into the life and death of hundreds of millions of people. Zelensky, the actor. This is really, we've never seen something like that. If things continue, it's all about conditions. People often talk about sparks. What will be the spark?
No kidding, man.
Sparks is an amateur question. Professionals talk about conditions. There's always sparks. And the conditions that are being set now, with whether it be the inputs of fertilizer, fungicides, pesticides, all the other chemicals that go into agriculture, the energy, diesel, LNG, just so many factors that are really going the wrong direction. Transport, famines in the past have generally been, recently I found a 1910, 1911 Britannica, and I looked up famine. I was just seeing what they, thought about famine back then. And it was a very wisely written entry in the Britannica, and they said and the entry posited that large famines are probably a thing of the past because now we have modern transportation. Obviously, some of the largest famines were yet to come because the largest famines are always caused not by locusts and drought, they're caused by people taking advantage of these things, right? Like the Holodomor in 1932-33 in Ukraine. Very good book on that called Red Famine.
Where 6 million people were starved to death by the communists and where women were shot if they went out into the fields that had already been harvested to glean individual kernels of grain by hand to feed their children. If they didn't turn over those individual kernels of grain, then they were summarily executed. And that was fun in the communist Soviet Union. Only 6 million Ukrainians. And so, and you're exactly right on the famine front, is we like to think that the reason that people starve is because we don't have enough food. And at the moment, the reason that people starve is because we're stupid and often malevolent. And so, so Germany's in trouble. And a huge part of this, as far as I'm concerned, is because of these unbelievably ill-advised energy policies that were hypothetically put in place to aid the planet's movement towards lower climate transformation. And fair enough, maybe we have some concern on that front, but this absurd panicking combined with post hoc central planning and this insane notion that we can somehow make energy more expensive without producing cascading sequences of catastrophes is naive beyond belief and malevolent, at least in part. So now Germany's in trouble because they're hyper-reliant on the Russians. And so now back to the Dutch farmers. Now the Dutch government put pressure on the farmers recently because a legislative body that was EU controlled, that's my understanding, decided in favor of an idiot environmental group and the court compelled the government, so that's a non-legislative body, by the way, the court compelled the government to act in relation to the farmers. And apparently the farmers have had enough of this. And so what's happening in Holland and elsewhere in Europe on the revolutionary front, let's say, and what do you think their motives are, and what effect has this had in Holland?
Wow, this is a big topic. As you know, the Dutch farmers are probably the finest and most efficient in the world, right? And practically no Dutch people seem to know that, which is extraordinary, right? And they don't realize how important their farmers are to the world, as the second largest food exporter in the world.
Yeah, it's a miracle, right? Because how big is Holland? It's a tiny country. You can drive across it in like 3 hours.
Meanwhile, Mark Rutte, the prime minister, is the teacher's pet of Klaus Schwab. I mean, he's even more favorited than Trudeau, right? Which is pretty hard to do. And so...
That's right. That's a hard contest to win on the appalling front.
Yeah. And so, the bureaucrats in Brussels, They are ruling by decree, right? And of course, it has nothing to do with nitrogen. Here they're talking about nitrogen. It has nothing to do with nitrogen. It has nothing to do with ammonium. It has to do with numerous things. One is taking the land, just as happened with Stalin in Ukraine, labeling the farmers kulaks in Ukraine, the Ukrainian farmers, and attacking and killing them. Here in Netherlands, there's an information campaign to make the farmers look like bad guys here as well. I mean, these are the new kulaks, right? Meanwhile, let me tell you something about farmers. I have spent more than half of my life overseas, more than 80 countries, a lot of war. I'm always going out with farmers, right? And I've never met farmers from any country I can't get along with. I mean, like even Taliban farmers had common sense. At one point, I'm in Afghanistan out with one guy, he's growing opium. He's growing poppy for opium. And he said, he's showing me the bugs on his plant. He said, your helicopters drop these bugs on our plants at night to kill our plants. And I said, well, no, sir, we should be doing that because you're creating opium, but we don't. We're not that smart. And he goes, yes, you're not that smart. And then let's go have tea. And but anyway, even at one point, I'm out with because the 2 years I spent in Afghanistan, 1 year was with various militaries like British and American militaries and Lithuanians and that sort of thing. And another year was just alone, running around out with farmers and whatnot. And at one point,
farmers are so much, they're like truckers in that regard. They're so much in contact with
get along with them. They have
they're like
sense.
Electricians and contractors and carpenters. That's why Christ was a carpenter, by the way, because if you're not honest, you can't build a house that stands up, man. And he wasn't a PhD sociologist. He was a carpenter. And those people who have to have their hands in the dirt and their feet on the ground, they have a sense about how the world works that's practical and embodied that the pin-headed academic globalists lack entirely and are also often incredibly jealous of. And so in Canada, it was the farmers and the truckers who rose up, the misogynists and the bigots and the racists in our prime minister's terms. And then that's triggered these co-occurring protests in the US and in Holland. And now, it isn't easy to get farmers upset either, because those tractors that they bring to the protests, those things are bloody expensive, and most of the farmers don't own them. They have to finance them, and so they're running on very thin margins, 3 to 5% a year generally, and you have to be one canny person to run a big farm in a modern economy. You have to be paying attention to all sorts of unbelievably complicated and sophisticated things. And so when the farmers have been pushed to the point where they're willing to take time away from their farms to spray manure on the government steps, it's probably time to listen. So I agree with you on that front 100%. So, okay, so you're in Holland and you're talking to the farmers, and what are they telling you?
Well, you basically are reading my mind, which is very difficult to do. When I was just in Mexico, and I saw the Dutch farmers, I know a lot of people in Netherlands. And so when I was getting inside, that they were acting up, I was like, what, Dutch farmers are actually protesting?
No, yeah, right, man. The last people you'd ever expect.
So that's why I jumped on the airplane, because if the Dutch farmers are acting up, I need to come over here and hear what they have to say.
That's for sure.
And so let's talk about that. It's first of all, clearly the WEF, the WEF, they call it WEF here in the Netherlands, the World Economic Forum, is trying to control food supply, right? That is production and distribution, right? And so, and one of the ways to do this is, as Stalin did and Mao did in China, and Stalin did in Ukraine and Russia, is to take the farms away from the traditional farmers and then put your farmers on that land, right?
To what end, Michael? Like, I read about, the notion that we need to, turn to plant-based foods and insect-based protein in the future, and that, meat production and all the cow methane are contributing to the degradation of the environment. But like, what do you see this as a plan, or just as a part of the globalist utopian ideologically blind stupidity? Because, farmers do pollute. There is runoff from fertilizer. It does cause algal blooms, for example, in the water. And these are problems. I don't think they're insurmountable problems. But you're pointing to something that's more malevolent and deeper and programmatic. And we don't want to go there without questioning that presumption. I always think if you can explain it with stupidity, you don't have to explain it with malevolence.
Well, as you know, be careful with that one, because sometimes we do have to go to malevolence in this
I
case.
know, we do, yeah.
And I watch your show enough to know you know exactly why this is happening. And let's talk about this. If the Dutch farmers, let's take this as a premise, are the most efficient in the world, well, let's just say they're the second most efficient. Why would you knock them out of the saddle to get somebody else to produce the food? Where? Indian farmers? I mean, who's going to produce this food in a much less efficient way that would create even more pollution? This is clearly about control. Also, there's something that you never hear in any press that I've heard in the United States is the tri-state city. Tri-state city is this smart city that they're proposing to build between the tri-states are Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany. So this mega city, basically, that would take up all this farmland in that area, and which would bring huge amounts of more people into this area, right? So the tri-state city is something you don't hear much about, but that's another part of this plan. There was a fire about maybe 10 days ago. I went to it right after the next morning, and it's at a picnic distribution center, which is there was an investment, $600 million into this picnic food distribution center from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, coincidentally, and it burned down, right? And so that brought a little, raised some eyebrows. Why did that thing just burn down? There's many of them. There's others in Netherlands that are growing, but the bottom line is the Bill and Melinda, or Bill Gates, is buying up farmland, as you know, all over the place.
I know. He is the biggest private landowner in the United States right now, and the land that he's buying up, he's taking out of food production. And it seems to be because he's obsessed about meat production, at least in part, doesn't believe that that's part of a sustainable future. And so, but I do share your skepticism. It's the same thing happens on the bloody energy front. It's like, well, Australia won't build coal-generating electrical plants, but they'll ship their bloody coal to China, where they're going to build much dirtier plants. And the same thing applies to Canada. If we shut down our energy industry, which our bloody, insane, narcissistic, delusional, traitorous prime minister happens to think is a good idea and seems to be working as hard as he can to manage, all that's going to happen is that we're going to cede the ground to people like Putin, who we also turned into a radical enemy with his hands on the control pump for Europe. I mean, I don't see how we could be stupider here in the West if we actually took courses in stupidity and tried as hard as we could. We seem to be doing everything we can to break everything as rapidly as possible. And then I wonder too, has it got to the point where the people who think, that you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, and there's too many people on the planet, think that this is some sort of like needle's eye that we have to go through, all this mass starvation and death, so that we end up with a sustainable population? I mean, Jesus Christ, that's a dim and grim scenario. But as you said, why would you take the Dutch farmers out of business when they're so unbelievably hyper-productive and efficient? It's not like there's too much food, especially not if we don't have farmers.
If anything, I would be trying to get a large agricultural institute here in Netherlands to teach other farmers how to be as efficient as Dutch farmers are, replicate these farmers. In Afghanistan, actually, many of the farmers coming over, I was out in the farms quite a lot, were actually Dutch farmers to teach Afghans how to do things better. But the bottom line is, as you can see, there is a huge, I watch you all the time, you know what's happening. There's a huge authoritarian the desire to have a one world order is clearly strong. And this isn't the first time it's happened. As you know, it's a constant in human behavior. And also as somebody who studies the human psyche a lot, as you do, you realize pulling these farmers off of their traditional farms unroots them. It cuts their anchor, their boat anchor. They're going to be drifting, culturally. So that makes them much easier you can't control farmers well. That's why Stalin wanted to get rid of the farmers. Stalin had to get rid of those farmers because farmers have a mind of their own. Same with Mao. You got to get rid of those farmers because they think for themselves. And likewise here, these Dutch farmers think for themselves. And so they're the bad guys. To me, they're the great guys. These are the people that we have to defend. That's our backbone. They are our backbone. That's why I flew to Netherlands from Mexico. I mean, that's how important this is.
Okay, so what have you discovered on the ground there? You've been talking to farmers. Tell us, first of all, about how the protests were organized, what their scope is, and why the farmers are doing this and what they hope to accomplish.
Well, the farmers in Netherlands are amazingly cognizant of what's happening. Many people that I talk with around the world don't realize, these other things like the WEF, WEF and these sorts of things. But the Dutch farmers are talking about it in detail. They're like, the nitrogen is nonsense, and it's all about Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates is trying to do this, and they'll go into great detail. They know exactly what's happening. They're trying to take our land because of this, and that, and the other. And, they know it. They're not just like in Panama, it's another story. Panama is just like, give us cheap gas, give us cheap cheese, cheap this and cheap that, and we'll go home, right? They're easily satisfied. Not the Dutch farmers, they're more sophisticated. These are serious players here. And again, that's why I jumped on an airplane. If people like this are blocking streets around Netherlands, and we got the German farmers joining up with them, and they're blocking the border together, German and Dutch farmers, right? Polish farmers, I love Poland. I spent 2 years there. Polish farmers are making videos in support of Dutch farmers. That's how much look, that started in Canada, jumped over to the United States. It's over here now. I mean, it's really growing. This courage is spreading. And so, and you see Italian farmers, Spanish farmers, people are rising up. And the more they realize what's actually happening, because, the man behind the curtain is the WEF, the World Economic Forum. Of course, we're going to have to deal with China. But at this rate, look, if Germany falls from these energy issues, which is looking pretty likely at this point, China is going to peel off the rock too, right? As are we economically, right? So,
for sure. Yeah, we cannot sustain the collapse of Germany. That's absolutely 100% obvious. That would be an utter bloody catastrophe.
If Germany collapses, EU's gone, right, for a while, right? And the EU will probably dissolve. That's my guess. I don't know. We'll see when time unfolds. But obviously, that'll take our economies with it, and China, right, and Japan. And of course, Japan imports, 60-70%? All these island nations and island state like Hawaii that import, 90% of their food imported, right? They are going to be in for a world of hurt. Japan imports most of its food. And, some of these countries that I have to, and I kind of, I should say, maybe insulted the French for a while years ago and saying, why are they defending all these small farmers all the time? Now I see the French wisdom. These small farmers, that resilience and these small, when you go to France and I'm sure you've been to France, and their small farmers everywhere provide a great deal of resilience, right? And that's why in Netherlands, if they lose, these farmers are vital for that. They're as important as their army. I mean, without these farmers, you're somebody else's. You're in somebody else's pocket. Bill Gates, the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, well, and also if you lose the farmers for one generation, you lose all that knowledge. And I saw the government said, well, some of these farmers are just going to have to move. It's like, what are they going to do? They're going to move their farm. How are you going to do that? You can't move a farm. And it's not like these things are just, transferable, fungible in this simplistic manner. And so, it's such a form of insanity, and it's all justified by the fact that these half-wit globalists are claiming constantly to be moral because they're saving the planet. And